Welcome back to the FM Garage. My name is Mike Usrey, and today I'm going to show you how to install our NC pedal cover kit. Before we get started with this installation, let's cover what parts are included with the kit. Here in front of me I have the dead pedal, the clutch, the brake, and the gas pedal covers. And then I also have included hardware, and along with that, a little Allen key wrench for us to use on the hardware that's included. Now that we've covered what parts are included with the kit, let's talk about the tools required to install this on your Miata. Here in front of me I have the tools we're going to be using in the installation today. And I'm going to start from this side and work our way over. Of course, we will need a drill. I'm going to use a battery-powered hand drill. We're also going to need at least 2 of these drill bits, in particular the 1/16 and the 3/16, but I'm also going to use a 1/8 drill bit as an intermediary. We also have the included Allen wrench that came with the kit. I have a 9mm wrench. I have a standard number 2 Phillips. I have an optional, not necessary, but it's good to have, deburring tool. I have some masking tape and a little fine point pen. I also have a light, some PPE, because there is going to be a chance of getting metal and plastic debris in your eyes, so make sure you're covered. And then also an optional brush. And this is simply because some of the plastic that's going to be retained on the gas pedal and the dead pedal, it's a good idea to brush it off if they're dirty or have rocks stuck in between the tread or anything like that. Pretty straightforward, easy tools that you probably already have most of these already. If not, these are readily available at most hardware and automotive tool stores, probably local to you, if not online. So now that we've talked about the tools, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with the dead pedal first because I can show you that one outside of the car. I'm going to show the dead pedal out of the car. Now, this is not because you need to remove it to be able to install the pedal cover, simply because it's a little easier to show you here on the bench than it is crammed up underneath the dash of the car. So that being said, there is a little bit of potential danger with installing your pedal cover while it's out of the car because there is overhang on the cover itself, and if you have it too far down, too far to the outside, or just misaligned, either it'll look a little funny or it'll actually make this really difficult to fit it back in the car. So if you do choose to pull your dead pedal out to install your cover, make sure that you take a look at it, get it a little bit eyeballed to see what potential issues you may run into when you reinstall it before you actually drill the holes to mount the cover. First thing we're going to do is take some tape, and I'm going to put some tape here on the pedal cover face so that way it's easier to see the marks, and I'll show you what I'm talking about in just a little bit. Also, I will mention that if you haven't already done so, brush this off, get all the dirt, rocks, whatever that might be stuck in here, because that'll make it difficult for your tape to stick onto the face of the pedal itself. And this doesn't have to be perfect, we're just using this so that way we can see our pen marks. I do want it nice and flat though. And on this side, this is the side that faces the transmission tunnel, I'm going to make sure that this edge is nice and crisp rolled over the corner, just like that. That's all we need to do with the tape. So now, what we're going to do is get our cover lined up where we want it to go. And on this cover, as I mentioned, it's easy to get it a little bit misaligned, but there is a slight angle change here, kind of in the middle of the pedal around this circular hole, both in the cover and in the pedal itself. It's only like maybe 2 degrees or so. It's a very slight change, but you can feel it with your finger and follow right here to the edge and then get your cover lined up right in the same place. So I'm also going to take my pedal cover, and it should line up with this kind of floor in effect, and this touching while the plastic is touching as well. The other thing that you want to do when you're making sure that you're getting your pedal cover lined up properly with the dead pedal is that you want this edge, this is the transmission tunnel side of the cover, to be flush both on the cover and on the dead pedal itself. So once you've got everything lined up where you want it, everything feels good, everything is exactly how it should be, carefully there we go. Carefully take a small fine-tipped pen and fill in the circles, or at least outline the circles here for these countersunk screw holes. There's 4 of them, 2 at the top, 2 at the bottom. So that way, now when I remove the cover, I can see all of the holes that I've just marked. Okay, so now we know where the holes for our screws need to be, and now we just need to drill some pilot holes. Another thing to note here is that because the texture of this pedal has actually got ridges and stuff like that in it, these holes that I just drew or circled may or may not be directly on a channel or on the top of one of the tread pieces. So your drill bit may actually move a little bit side to side. So take some precautions here. Hold your pedal as steady as you can, but you may need to drill a little bit at an angle to make sure that you're as close as you can to the center of this circle as possible. Before we get started though with using our drill, make sure you've got the appropriate safety equipment. I'm gonna wear some PPE to make sure I don't get plastic shrapnel in my eyeballs while I'm doing this. And here, I'm going to try to get this centered as possible. And I am a little bit on the edge here, so I'm gonna drill a little bit at an angle at first. Be very careful that you aren't putting your thumb, if you've got this on the bench, behind the drill, because you don't want a hole in your finger. There we go. So now that I've got it started a little bit, I can walk it in. There we go. So now I've got 1 pilot hole in this corner, and I'm going to do the same thing for the other 3. There we go, and just like that, we've got all our pilot holes drilled. Don't fret if they're not perfect. Part of the job of these countersunk holes and these screws that are countersunk head screws is that when you put them through and actually attach the cover to the pedal, it will help self-align, so do a little bit at a time. And before we do that, of course, I'm actually going to remove this plastic tape because its job is done. And lastly, we just need to attach the pedal cover to our dead pedal. Using 4 of these coarse thread screws, we're going to attach the dead pedal cover to the dead pedal itself. I'm first going to get my holes lined up, and I can see here that, yes, all 4 of them do line up. There we go. And using a number 2 Phillips screwdriver, we're going to get these started. I'm not going to thread this one in all the way. I'm going to go ahead and get all 4 of them started before I actually tighten them down. All right, so before I tighten them down, I'm just going to do one last check on the fit, make sure that I'm happy with how flush everything is and it's where I want it to be. And now I'm going to start tightening these down one at a time. This is plastic that you're threading into, so you want it snug, but be careful not to over torque and strip out the plastic. And just like that, our pedal cover for the dead pedal is installed. Looks pretty handsome if I do say so myself. And now for the fun part. We're gonna be working underneath the dash of the car, so it is gonna get a little bit tight. And for this video, I have removed the seat. I've also removed part of the underside of the dash just to make it easier to see what's going on. You don't have to do either of those things, but if you wanna make yourself a little bit of room, it's 4 bolts and a connector for the seat, and then 4 screws for this little plastic piece and a little metal tray that goes underneath the steering wheel. So they are pretty easy to take out if you do want a little bit more room to work. Now that I've done this, the first thing we're going to do is do the gas pedal cover, because this one I only need to drill 2 pilot holes and then I can install it. And then after that, we'll focus on the brake and the clutch pedal. Those are a little bit more in depth, but we'll get to that in a second. So I have the gas pedal over here, and I've brushed this off just so that way there's not a whole bunch of crud. I didn't do that with these two pedals, and again, we'll get to that in a second, but you do want this to be relatively clean, so that way you're dealing with a nice flat surface. And just like we did over here with the dead pedal, I'm going to take a little bit of masking tape and put it right over the top of our gas pedal. Now that we have the tape applied to our pedal, we're going to take our new cover and line it up here and get it positioned where it fits best over the top of the pedal. And you can see that the kind of larger end of the pedal is at the bottom, and that's because this will overhang the left side of the pedal a little bit, so that way it's easier for you to do the heel-toe maneuvers. And what I'm going to do is get the right side of the pedal lined up with the right side of the cover, and then kind of center it top to bottom. And then once I've got that in a position that I like, we're going to take our handy pen. I'm going to draw little circles here. There's only 2 of them on this pedal. Got one down here, one up here. So now when I remove this, you can see I have 2 circles, and they're going to be pretty much right in the middle of the pedal. So now that I have my references, I'm going to take my drill and drill bit, and this is the same 1/16 drill bit that we used on the dead pedal. I'm going to drill right in the center. These are basically hollow plastic pedals on the back side, so if you're trying to support it, keep your fingers well away from the back, because you will poke the drill through and put a hole in your finger if you're not careful. All right, so now we have our 2 pilot holes. Because this is under the dash and a little bit awkward, what is a good tip is actually to go ahead before you apply the pedal, is actually run in your coarse thread screws now. That way you can open up these holes and you can see what you're doing before you put the pedal cover on. You don't have to run them down all the way or anything like that. We're basically just opening up the holes so that way it's a little bit easier to actually get them started when we put the pedal cover in place. And then we get to put our cover on for real. Okay, there you have it. So these guys, they do have to get threaded into some pretty hard plastic. That pedal is a very stiff plastic, so it does require some effort. Be very careful as you're threading them in, because if you don't have the right size screwdriver, or if you are not quite very perfectly centered into the bit, you might accidentally strip the screw. They are stainless, so they will resist stripped stripped heads as much as possible, but you still can strip them if you're not careful. So now this pedal is good to go. Now we're ready to install the pedal covers for the brake and the clutch, and the process is pretty similar to the gas and the dead pedal, except that we will need to actually drill them out to a larger size to fit these fine thread screws, and then they will be attached with some nylock nuts on the back. So to get these started, what we're going to do is first remove our pedal covers. On the brake and clutch pedals on these cars, they are actually just a rubber cover that if you peel from behind, you can kind of pry them off. They will be a bit stiff, but they just are a little boot or cover that comes right off. And you can see I didn't bother cleaning these because these won't be reused. Now we've got the bare metal exposed here, and take into consideration here before we start drilling holes that this rod is welded to the backside of the pedal face, and you can kind of see where some of the weld is coming through on the front side. So we obviously don't want to drill there and weaken any of the pedal structure itself, but we will be drilling on the bottom and then on the tops, kind of towards the top corners here. So use your fingers and feel behind those pedals and just kind of get an idea of where this rod is going to be attached to the backside. That way you don't accidentally drill into it and cause any other damage that's going to be a pain to deal with later. And then, just like the other pedals, it's time to tape. And just folding around the corners a little bit, that way I can see the profile a little bit easier. There we go. Now, for your covers, these are identical, so don't worry about them getting mixed up. It doesn't matter, they're the same. But what we're going to do, just like the other ones, is mark the positions of these 3 mounting holes where the screws are going to go through. And you'll notice they are a bit oversized compared to the pedal itself. So you do have a little bit of room that you can kind of move it around as necessary to get the right fit. What I'm going to try to do is get them more or less centered left to right. That way there's just as much overhang on the left side as there is the right side. And then I'm going to try to get them relatively centered top to bottom as well. I think there's maybe just a touch more overhang on the bottom here. But once I'm happy with the position, I'm going to mark the holes. And then remove your cover. And we're actually going to take a little look here at the holes and make sure that they are in a decent enough position that you're not too close to the edges where you drill. In this case, I am actually a little bit too low, or lower than I'd prefer on the bottom. So I'm actually going to redo this one, because I don't want to have a hole that is actually at risk of falling off the edge. There we go, that looks better. So now the top holes are a little bit taller, but also I have just a little bit more room on the bottom, but it's still kind of in this flat portion around the base of the pedal. So I'm pretty happy with that. So now that I have that one done, I'll go ahead and do my clutch pedal as well. So now I'm happy with the positions of all of the mounting holes that I'm about to drill. And in an ideal world, hopefully you will be following our instructions a little bit better than I have, and you will have a center punch. A center punch essentially will be not like a drill bit, but it'll be a sharp object that has a bit of a point, and you can locate it in the center of the position that you're going to drill it, and then you'll take your hammer and you'll smack it, and that'll actually make a little indent right in the middle of where you intend to drill. That way your drill bit doesn't walk around, which is much easier to do when you're drilling metal than it is when you're drilling plastic. So this is a good time to do that. I actually don't want to have one of those handy, unfortunately, so I'm going to take my chances just a little bit. This is a classic case of do as I say, not as I do. But I'm going to try my best to be very careful. I'm going to start with the 1/16 inch drill bit, and I'm going to aim for as close as I can to the center here, and go slow at first until I'm actually got a little bit of a divot going. As you can see, I did end up switching to a slightly larger drill simply because this has more cutting surface at the tip than the little 1/16 does. If your drills aren't really sharp, if they've been neglected or you've been using them incorrectly or anything like that and they're dull, then it'll take you a long time to drill the holes. I stepped up to 1/8. That gives me just a little bit more cutting surface there. Also, the importance of your drill material is going to be apparent, because if you have a really cheap set of drills, it's going to take you forever to drill all of these holes. This metal is pretty hardened steel, so it will be difficult to drill through if you aren't using a tungsten or a cobalt drill set. So I've got one of these started. Let's go ahead and do the others. Now that we've drilled the pilot holes in our pedals, we just need to open them up so that way they're the right size for the hardware that we're going to pass through. So instead of what I was using to actually drill the pilot holes, this 1/8, we're going to step it up to a 3/16 inch drill. So I'm going to get that loaded up and then just open up these holes. So now our hardware will fit through. And it doesn't need to be a super tight fit because we need to have a little bit of wiggle room in case your holes aren't exactly centered where they're supposed to be in the covers. So 3/16 is usually perfect for that, as long as you were pretty good about centering your original pilot holes. Okay, we've got our holes drilled. They're out to the correct 3/16 size. And now we can remove our tape. Its job is done. The holes are drilled out to the right size, but if you're like me and you did have to kind of struggle at an awkward angle to push the drill through the pedals to actually get the holes made, they probably have a little bit of blowout on the backside where you'll feel some sharp kind of shrapnel that has been left over all around the edge of the hole. So we don't actually have this mentioned in the instructions, but an extra step you can do to kind of clean them up is use a deburring tool. So this little guy, it just rotates and it's got kind of a sharp edge on the inside, and I'll show you how to use it, but this is a simple tool. You can pick this up at a lot of local hardware stores and tool stores, and usually for only a few dollars. But this is an easy thing to do to clean up those holes if you have a little bit of extra burrs on the backside. So let's go ahead and do that now. When you're drilling holes through metal and you don't have quite the right pressure or a sharp enough drill, sometimes you'll have burrs on the backside. You don't really see them on the front side, so this won't affect how we install the pedal covers, but we do want our locking nuts to be able to sit flush or close to flush on the backside as much as possible. So this deburring tool, you simply insert it and then swizzle it around, give it a little bit of a angle, and you can go back and forth doing that, and that'll help clean up the back edges, the burrs on the backside. If you have one that's a bit shorter, you may also be able to get it in from the backside. This one's a little bit on the long side here, but basically you spin it around and you can get some of those burrs out, so that way it's a little bit easier to install your hardware, and also you aren't at risk of cutting your fingers open as you're tightening down this hardware. Now that we have the holes cleaned up, or at least as good as we're going to worry about for now, it doesn't have to be perfect, we are going to start assembling our pedal covers. So here's the final check if you actually did it correct. Our holes do line up, so that's very excellent news. So these little countersunk screws, they have the fine thread on them with a little Allen keyway head. They just get inserted from the front side. And then our nylock nut gets started on from the back side. And I'm going to go ahead and just get these done up by hand before I use any tools, just because I want to make sure that I can get all of my hardware started. This corner in particular is a little bit difficult, just because we do have the leg of the pedal here that extends right next to it. So you may have to kind of get your nut positioned first and then thread the screw into it. There we are. So that one's on. While we're here, I'm going to do the other one. And good news, that one also lines up. Excellent. Okay, now they're both loosely installed. And finally, what we need to do is use our included Allen wrench and then an open-ended wrench. In this case, these particular lock nuts are 9mm, so that's what I have here. So these are small tools. As I'm tightening down this hardware, I don't want to go crazy tight. I'm not as worried about the wrench, but this is a little bitty Allen, so you can put a little bit of force into it, but don't go crazy because you can break this easier than you might think. But now that I've got everything tightened down, I have it where I like it. They aren't moving anywhere. I do want to give them a little bit of a test to make sure everything is secure, and I'm happy with that. Another pro tip, if you are so inclined, especially if you're looking at this and saying, well, Mike, you didn't get the tops of these as level as possible. You're right, I did eyeball this a little bit. So if you want yours as level as possible, feel free to get one of those little bitty levels, as long as it fits under here and you can kind of balance it on the top of your pedals. See if you can get them as level as possible. That is awesome. More power to you. Otherwise, now that we are at this point, the only thing we have left to do is clean up our mess. There's quite a bit of metal shavings in here, so get out your vacuum, clean this up, and then you are done. Thanks for joining along with this installation video. Hope that you learned something. If you have any other questions or need help beyond what we covered here in the video, feel free to give us a call, send us an email, send us a chat. We're happy to help you out with anything that you might run into. And of course, if you like this kind of content, head on over to our YouTube channel. We do have lots of installation videos just like this one, as well as tech talks and performance theory. So tons of content, go take a look. And of course, we hope to see you in the next one.